Hi folks, it's Jeanette, your personal diabetes coach. If you are looking for non-judgmental, non-boring diabetes coaching, then you're in the right place. If you like what you see here today, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you know when I upload new coaching content. Today, we are going to talk about carbohydrates. One thing that I've noticed in my practice is that even when people have had diabetes for a long time, they still don't know a whole lot about carbohydrates. So today, we're going to talk about that. Let's get started. Sometimes it's frustrating for me as a diabetes provider and diabetes educator when I get a new patient who has had diabetes for a long time and they tell me that they can't eat carbohydrates or that they were told they should avoid carbohydrates. This is a pretty silly thing for somebody to tell you because carbohydrates are in a lot of things. For example, vegetables are carbohydrates. So you wouldn't really tell somebody that they should avoid vegetables. Now, that's not to say that all carbohydrates are made equally. There are some carbohydrates that you should eat less of, and some carbohydrates that you should eat more of. For example, sugar, like say jelly beans, is a carbohydrate. You should probably avoid those, not just somebody with diabetes, but everybody. Occasionally, eating a couple jelly beans isn't really going to hurt you, but it's not something you would want to eat every day. On the other hand, something like broccoli, that's a carbohydrate, but it's something that you absolutely could eat every day. The next question is, why, if they're both carbohydrates, should I avoid one and eat the other one all the time? There are a couple of reasons for that. One is the type of carbohydrate that it is. There are simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates. I'm not going to go into the molecular structure of simple carbohydrates versus complex carbohydrates, but we all can kind of intuitively know that something like jelly beans is going to increase our blood sugar higher and faster than, say, something like broccoli. So the jelly beans would be a simple carbohydrate, something that is going to affect our blood sugar a lot and quickly, whereas broccoli is a complex carbohydrate, meaning that it's going to have less of an effect on our blood sugar and affect our blood sugar slower. Now I know, jelly beans and broccoli, those are two ends of the spectrum, and there's a lot of foods in between, so there can be some nuance there. I'm going to try to give you a broad idea of how to look at carbohydrates, so when you see a food, you can make a good educated guess on what to do with that food. So let's start with just simple sugars. Those are things like candy, cakes, cookies, sugar, anything else that has sugar in it, honey, maple syrup. Now, I'm not saying you should avoid those things completely, but those are things that you need to be careful with and really plan ahead if you are going to include them in a recipe. The reason is they will increase your blood sugar quickly and more than some other carbohydrates. So that's sugars, candies, cookies, things like that. Those are things that people are pretty aware of. Now let's talk about a group that is really difficult for people. Pastas and breads. Those are more complex carbohydrates, but still mostly just carbohydrate. There's not a whole lot in there. So if you are eating just plain old pasta, white pasta, or white bread, or white rice fits into this category too, those are going to act a lot like those simple sugars in your body. There's not a lot to help slow things down. So those are going to hit your system. They're going to increase your blood sugar quicker and higher than some other things. But that's not to say that you can't ever eat pasta or bread, or that you can't necessarily eat pasta or bread every day. It's just important to choose the right kinds of pasta and bread. So we would want you to avoid white pastas, white breads, white rice, because your body just sees those as sugar. You can replace it with things like whole grain breads, whole grain pastas, brown rice. Now, these are items that, yes, you can have a little bit of every day, but you want to use smaller portions because essentially your body really is seeing these as sugar. The reason why whole grain pastas, breads, and rice affect your blood sugar less is because it still has the whole grain. So it has the protein portion and the fiber portion of the original grain. In the white versions of those things, they take all of that fiber and protein off, so you're really just left with the sugar part of the grain. When you eat the whole grain, the fiber and the protein that's still included will help to slow down the absorption of any carbohydrate in the grain and will lead to a slower rise and a smaller rise in your blood sugar. Now, let's talk vegetables. Vegetables are carbohydrates. They just have a lot of fiber to slow down the absorption of whatever carbohydrate is in it. There are some vegetables that are more problematic, and there are some vegetables that are less problematic. If you've had diabetes for any length of time, I guarantee you've been told, don't eat white potatoes. I would say that's generally true. Not saying never eat a white potato, but if you are going to have some white potato, you would want to make sure that it's just a very small amount, and you would want to put some other things with it to try to smooth out the absorption of that carbohydrate. So other vegetables that are very high in carbohydrate and don't have as much fiber and protein to balance everything out are, so we've got potatoes, peas, corn, other starchy vegetables, but the big ones are potatoes, peas, and corn. Sweet potatoes don't necessarily fall into that category because they have a lot of fiber. Anybody who's ever cooked a sweet potato and kind of opened it up, you can actually see the fibers in the sweet potato. So you're going to notice that when you eat a sweet potato, it affects your blood sugar a little less than if you were to eat a white potato. Now, just vegetables in general. Things like lettuce, leafy greens, broccoli, asparagus, things that have a lot of fiber are going to have very little effect on your blood sugar, even though they're still carbohydrate. Another category that's carbohydrate that a lot of people don't think of is dairy. So dairy actually has sugar in it. It's typically lactose and can increase your blood sugar. One reason why you might find that if you drink a glass of milk, it doesn't necessarily increase your blood sugar as much as, say, drinking a soda is because milk and dairy also has some protein and some fat to help slow down the absorption of those carbohydrates. Same goes with cheese. Cheese is just dairy, but it still has the fat in it. You'll find that when you eat cheese, the fat in it will slow down the absorption of the carbohydrate that's in it. So, we've got several categories of carbohydrate. One, just the simple sugars, things like candy, cookies, cakes. Those are ones that you should generally avoid. Again, not saying you should never eat them, but those are things that you should have a very limited amount in your diet. And know that if you do eat them, it's going to cause a more significant increase in your blood sugar than some of the other options. The next category are things like breads, pastas, rice, kind of the grain category. The most important thing to remember there is to avoid the white ones and stick with the brown ones. So whole grain pastas, whole grain breads, brown rice instead of white rice. The other thing to keep in mind with that group of carbohydrate is that you want to limit the amount. You wouldn't want to eat a big bowl of rice. A serving size of rice that would be about 15 grams of carbohydrate is about the size of a golf ball, so much less than you would think. So takeaway for that is definitely pay attention to portions in that pasta, bread, rice group. The next group of carbohydrates is vegetables, and that can be broken into kind of two different categories. The first category are the more starchy vegetables, things like potatoes, peas, corn. Those are the ones that they do have some fiber and some protein to help balance things out, but they're still pretty high in carbohydrate. So those are ones that you would definitely want to watch your portions on. You can have them, but you want to watch portions and try to put them with other things that will help slow down the absorption of the sugar. The second category of vegetables are what we all think of as vegetables. The green things, peppers, cucumbers, broccoli, cauliflower, things like that. Those you can pretty much have as much as you want. It's not really going to affect your blood sugar all that much. You probably wouldn't even notice. So those are definitely things that you don't have to worry about so much. And then the final category of carbohydrates that we talked about today was dairy. This is one that a lot of people don't think about, but dairy is a carbohydrate. So you want to watch those. Most people don't have a lot of problems with dairy, and that's because it also has some protein and fat to help slow down the absorption. It's definitely important to talk to your diabetes provider or your diabetes educator about their recommendations for your personal diet. Typically in my practice, I try not to tell people they can never eat something. I try to put it more in categories of, this is something that you should mostly avoid, but if you're going to have some, you're going to have some. Just know it's going to raise your blood sugar a little more than some other things. And then I also try to shift from saying you can't have something to saying maybe you substitute this for this. A good example of that is in that grain category with pastas, breads, and rice. Not saying that you can't have bread. I never say that you can't have pasta, but it's best to choose the whole grain version or even non-white flour versions. Nowadays, they have lentil pasta and garbanzo bean pasta. So that's where it's not a never, and you can have them regularly. You just need to choose which one to best maintain your blood sugar. And then as far as the vegetables go, again, never say never. You can have some of those starchy vegetables. You want to try to put it with some other things to slow down the absorption. And I will definitely do a video just about that, how to mix foods to slow the absorption. But the three most problematic are the potatoes, peas, and corn. So those are the ones you can have them, watch your portions. And then the second category, the regular vegetables, have as many of those as you want. So, and then dairy, it's hit or miss individually. So it's definitely something to try out to see how dairy affects your blood sugar specifically. Okay, that was a lot of information. That was like a crash course in carbohydrates. I do plan on making videos about each specific group at some point and kind of how to handle those in trying to manage your diabetes. But I think that this will be a good start for you to just start thinking about carbohydrates in a different way. The main thing that I'd like for you to take away from this video is that there's nothing that you just can't have. I mean, patients will ask me, are you saying I can't eat sugar? And I'm like, well, you can eat whatever you want. It's just important to be smart about it. And if you do eat something that you're not supposed to, and you have a high blood sugar, you know what caused it. And that we can work with. So I really try to avoid restrictive talk with my patients and really talk about ways to substitute things. One of the mantras in my office is I tell my patients, I want to help you to fit diabetes into your life instead of fitting your life into diabetes. And that's what this is all about. If you have any specific questions about your diet and recommendations for your particular issues or needs, I recommend that you reach out to your diabetes provider or your diabetes educator to talk about those specifics.